and welcome to the Atlantic Council. I'm Josh Lipsky, Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Geoeconomics Center. On behalf of the Geoeconomics Center, the Adrian Arch Latin America Center, and the 16 programs and centers of the Atlantic Council, we are pleased to welcome you to the first event of IMF World Bank Week at the Atlantic Council. Over the next 5 days, we will host 20 finance ministers and central bank governors, both here at the Council and inside our broadcast center at the IMF. 2 years ago, in this spot, in a major speech at the Council, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen emphasized the need for modernization of the Bretton Woods system. She reminded us that for the Bretton Woods system, there has to be a focus on the fact that it was founded not after war, but during war, in the hopes of building a more prosperous and secure future. Now, as these institutions mark their 80th anniversary this summer, it is time to make sure they are fit for purpose for the challenges ahead and adapt to the changes underway in the global economy. That is the purpose of our Bretton Woods 2.0 project at the Atlantic Council, and that is what we will work toward together throughout this week in Washington. We could not ask for a better guest to help us launch our events this week. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Mexico's Secretary of Finance and Public Credit, Rogelio Ramírez de la O. Secretary Ramírez de la O previously served on the Reinventing Bretton Woods Committee, the Commission for Environmental Cooperation of the North American Free Trade Agreement, and the Washington Conference of Private Sector Economists. He has published over 40 papers on economic policy, foreign debt, and U.S.-Mexico trade. In short, a person all those in Washington should listen to this week. With that, I would like to turn the floor over to my colleague Jason Marzak, Vice President and Senior Director of the Adrian Arch Latin America Center, who will moderate this conversation. Jason, thanks to you and everyone at the Adrian Arch Latin America Center for your incredible collaboration throughout the week. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Josh, and thanks to you and to the entire Geoeconomics Center for its partnership during IMF World Bank Week. Welcome to our in-person audience, as well as our live streaming audience, and especially pleased to be joined by Mexico's Secretary of Finance and Public Credit, Rogelio Ramírez de la O. Mr. Secretary, welcome. I was going to say welcome back to the Atlantic Council, but also welcome because the last time you were here, we were speaking virtually. And that was just a few months after you took office. I took office in July of 2021, and we had the pleasure of hosting you online in September of that year, thinking back to when we couldn't get together as much in person. But it's really thrilled to have you here for this first public event, given the importance of Mexico for the United States, and given the tremendous importance of Mexico for the Atlantic Council. At the Atlantic Council, we work very closely to promote stronger economic ties with Mexico, promote opportunities for nearshoring. I was just in Mexico a few weeks ago with my team for a conference on nearshoring and economic opportunities, and also had a chance to meet with different candidates, and working very closely at the nexus of the public and private sectors. Mr. Secretary, you've had, as Josh mentioned, a tremendous career prior to assuming your current position, and also an excellent few years in your current position, giving stability and articulating the numbers from Mexico for a larger audience. I want to start off with a broader question before we look at Mexico specifically. But you noted recently that geopolitical risks have put new pressure on the global economy. But despite that, the Mexican economy grew by more than its historic average in 2023. We're seated here on Monday morning, just after Iran launched missiles and drones into Israel, and you commented beforehand about the challenges and the tensions in the Middle East and what that can mean for the broader global economy. So especially Mexico's role as a G20 economy. What are your thoughts today? What are your thoughts today for the global economy and for the Mexican economy specifically, given the new tensions that we've seen in the Middle East just over the weekend?
Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you and with all of you. Thank you for the connection with such an important part of the world at this memorable date. And I say memorable date because we in Mexico, we are at the 6th year of an administration that has pursued structural change seriously. And having said that, our minds today are with obviously what is Mexico's role to play. And the role to play is primarily within the Mexican economy for the Mexican people. That's our foremost objective. Having said that, we are a highly open economy, one of the most open in the world for both trade and capital, and that gives us a feature that fewer economies in Latin America have. And we export around 35–36% of GDP, which is only comparable to the most open economies in Europe. And that makes us extremely sensitive, not just to what happens in the world economy, but also how it affects our people and how we can address the problems raised by global issues on the Mexican people. That is where our focus of policy is the Mexican people. Our focus on risk is both abroad and domestically. But the world challenges are, as you know, unprecedented and unexpected. And that makes the Mexican policy response to be of the utmost importance. And we want to reaffirm that we are very receptive of anything that happens in the world market and anything that happens with global risk.
Just last week, the IMF Managing Director, Kristalina Georgieva, was actually in your seat, and I said something along the lines of prepare for the unexpected as the world faces new challenges, and talked about whether it's going to be the transitional 20s, the turbulent 20s, or the tepid 20s. As Josh mentioned, the Geoeconomic Center here has a whole project on Bretton Woods 2.0, and as we near the IMF's 80th anniversary, I'd like to ask what changes, if any, you would like to see take place within that institution, and how would you like to see, especially we're beginning IMF World Bank week here, how would you like to see the IMF and the World Bank evolve, say, by the 100th anniversary of the Bretton Woods Conference? What changes do you see as necessary for both institutions to be even more responsive and an even stronger partner for countries like Mexico?
Thank you for the question. Bretton Woods has been up for a revision for some time now. And we welcome very much U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's remark that this is a time to really focus on what's needed to be done. The institutions originally were aimed at supporting social and economic development across the post-war world. And as such, they play a very crucial role in the rebuilding of the world economy and setting rules for a fair distribution of the rebuilding costs and the rebuilding rewards. Mexico is in agreement with the multilateral development banks in mitigating current risks. We're also aware that the architecture of the Bretton Woods that we have today needs to be revisited in at least one, and this is the one that is in my mind, and is the huge size of current account imbalances that have given rise to the demands by the U.S. administration, but that came really after so many years of carrying a trade imbalance that is not going to be conducive to any good end. And correcting the imbalances is not just addressing the trade balance, but addressing whether the architecture for world trade rules is rightly focused on the issues that lend themselves otherwise to manifestations of inconformity, as we have seen in recent years. I think this is a high time also to revisit the way in which financial support, I wouldn't say assistance, because this is support. I am talking about mainly of Latin American countries that have every means to grow, every means to develop, and still lack supporting mechanisms adequate to their needs. I think those three items belong well within the scope of course, of Mexico, but also for Latin America.
When you look at the timeline for revisiting the institutions, for changing some of the architecture, I mean, part of that is also to change the architecture so that countries, especially middle-income countries, could benefit from the partnership with institutions like the IMF and World Bank, where there are reforms underway, but those reforms are maybe not happening as quickly as countries would like to see them happen, to be able to address the urgent challenges that countries face, especially coming out of the COVID pandemic and the continued pressure on various economies.
That is right. So, but we usually shouldn't also be similarly impatient, because we know that if we are in a multilateral framework, we have to give time to the multilateral framework first to assess whether the manifestations of need here and there are well shared and there is consensus to move. And yes, individually, I am impatient, someone else may be impatient, but individuality is a different thing from collective action, and collective action has to create conscience among the members of the collectivity, and it also has to gain consensus. Take, for example, the view that there has to be a global tax. Why a global tax? Because there is a great loophole in the world economy for operations, transactions, and sales rewards that because of the nature of and the evolution of the world economy, allow certain sellers to benefit unduly from a system that doesn't address that issue. So in Mexico, we want to address that as much as everybody else wants. And we are looking forward to engage more with the community, with the G20 and with the multilateral development world in general, but also with institutions like you. This institution is a highly distinguished connector and carrier, and also sensitive to what are real ideas playing out in the world. And I congratulate you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. And we look forward to continuing to work with you. Mexico's leadership, especially as a G20 country, will continue to be a focus of the Atlantic Council this year with the G20 in Brazil. And this week we're officially launching our AC at the G20 broader project and larger body of work that we have throughout this year. I want to move on and give you an opportunity to speak about the Mexican economy specifically, and you mentioned that as well in your opening comments, that your focus, rightfully so, is on the Mexican people and providing opportunities for the Mexican people. Recently, the 2025 economic pre-criteria were released. where that showed a proposed increase in the deficit in 2024, and also a significant decrease out for public spending outlined in the document for 2025. I'd like to give you an opportunity to speak about both those issues, both your perspectives and your plans with regard to the Mexican deficit, and also the cuts in public spending, and why you see that as imperative looking ahead.
Thank you. I would make 4 key remarks that would set framework, and then I will dwell into this particular issue of the budget balance. This government comes after 6 years of pursuit, and I was referring to serious structural change. And that means serious in the sense that we're not copying a framework like we did in the 1990s, because the 1990s framework was generally, the consensus was generally shared by everyone. So countries needed to follow that consensus. But this time around, each country is facing very different situations that don't lend themselves to a general prescription or a recipe as if a doctor were granting recipes.
Yes.
So strengthening income levels has been item number 1 in our agenda, particularly at the lower levels of income in Mexico. And we have done that with a multiple set of policies, having a jump in the minimum wage. Minimum wage had been deflated for consecutively, year after year, for a long period. Disposal of bad labor outsourcing practices, strengthening retirement pensions, and all of this supplemented by universal grants to senior citizens and grants for the disabled, students in school, young people with no school and with no job, however, that need and are willing to get into an apprentice enrollment mechanism. And number 2, regional development programs, where public investment comes at the forefront in breakthrough projects that the public sector would never imagine of undertaking, because it's a long-term development plan. So this has opened up a new large region in Mexico that had been left aside, and now we have that region incorporated onto the Mexican economy with all that it represents in terms of consumption, labor force, and investment. And then strengthening the supply side, starting with the renegotiation of the USMCA, providing certainty to global and Mexican companies, raising the level of public investment in energy, revamping the framework of public-private partnerships in a series of contracts, in a sense that it also makes sense for private sector investors and provides certainty to them, and maintain sound macro balances in the fiscal accounts. So those 4 items are the central axis of our action, and obviously there are many other issues that we want to participate in, but this is our framework.
And so within that framework, as you look to public spending in 2025, or look at the deficit, both of which those new numbers were presented as part of the economic pre-criteria.
Yeah.
How do those adjustments figure into those broader areas of prioritization you just outlined?
That's right. The 2024 budget contains an extraordinary level of completion works for large infrastructure that are about to be completed. When I say about to be completed is that we are all focused, like every weekend, in visiting the work and having meetings and addressing the pending issues and programming the termination of the work for the current period, so that the deployment of investment over this period is high, relatively high, as it had not been in previous years. Once we complete the jobs, this is not going to be a current budget spending item any longer. Certainly, there will be operational spending because there's going to be a new airport in Tulum, but the cost of the airport has already been borne in the year 2024. So the Tulum airport is going to need maintenance and so on, but it is also going to get revenues. So it's a different picture in terms of budget balances in 2025 as it was or it is being in 2024. And that's why we can certainly estimate that the level of needed budget spending on CapEx for 2025 is not going to be there in 2025. Yes, every economy and every project needs a time in which to push the accelerator, as you say in this country, press the gas on, and also a time to take pause. And for us, we are pressing the gas on 2024 for those reasons, but they're not related to anything else than CapEx and concluding some other programs.
That makes sense. And I want to also ask you about Mexico's increased role as far as Mexico's exports to the U.S., which reached over $475 billion last year, a historic moment since Mexico overtook China as the U.S.'s top goods supplier for the first time in 2 decades. Given that, how do you see, how does Mexico envision its role in the North American economy, especially what you see as the opportunities to further leverage the economic growth and the economic position that Mexico has increasingly taken within the North American economy?
Mexico, in terms of international developments, is committed to North American integration. We are an open country. We trade with everybody in the world. We have an open trade system, but we are committed to North American integration because that's where the core of our activity, export-related, lies. And that's the only country in the world with whom we share an over 3,000-kilometer border and millions of passes every day over the border. So clearly, it's a unique situation, and that's why we are committed to that, first and foremost, in terms of international relations. Now, it doesn't mean that everything else comes secondary, but everything else comes next. And we are aware that the renegotiation of the USMCA, and it's going to be up for renewal in 2026, requires a level of traceability for the origin of the products, and we are aware that it raises a higher level of demand on the part of the members. The members have to be aware that they are trading mainly and foremost North American content.
And you're referring to concerns about China and Chinese?
Yes. We trade with China. Actually, we have a very large trade deficit with China. And that's why we are obviously very receptive to this issue. But we were receptive every time, ever since the U.S. authorities raised the flag about the trade imbalance with China. So we also are aware that the Bretton Woods system doesn't really review in detail and address in detail the practices. And the practices lend a lot to, as I mentioned, inconformities and things that need to be properly attended by the organizations in charge. And that's where we are.
Secretary, I want to ask you one last question. As we mentioned, you're here for IMF World Bank Week. You're just starting off the week, and pleasure to have you starting off the week here at the Atlantic Council. What will success look like for you as part of the meetings this week? What are you hoping to achieve?
We are, as was known, very much in contact with the U.S. Treasury and the agenda for global tax, but also a more bilateral agenda that has to do with greater financial integration and information exchange. We are fully on board. So that's number one item. Number two is to help the communication between Mexican policy making and the collectivity, the audience, not just our counterparts in the G20 and in the rest of the membership of the IMF and the World Bank, but also with organizations, analysts, and rating agencies as well. Because all of this communication is always needed, particularly when we are about to close an administration that has been in communication with you for 6 years. So obviously you want to know, and how do you see the closure, and how do you see, obviously. Yeah. So these questions we want to address, we want to be close to you in this communication, not just today, but for the remainder of this period. And we want you to know that we hear and we are very interested to continue hearing.
Thank you very much. Well, Mr. Secretary, we wish you a very successful week here in Washington. At least the weather seems like it can cooperate, so hopefully the rest of the week will cooperate. And again, I want to thank you for coming here today. Pleasure to have this conversation and to hear your perspectives both on Mexico as well as Mexico's role as a broader G20 economy. And we look forward to welcoming you back at the Atlantic Council in the near future.
Thank you so much to all of you, and have a good day.
Muchas
gracias.
Thank you.
Gracias.